Vantassel or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Glad to have you on board as always. I hope you had a great week. I had an interesting week in the sense I had to go down for took some training down in Bozeman area this week in my day job, and uh, learned some interesting stuff that I should have known ordinarily, and also saw a really awesome presentation on the ag use of drones for applying pesticides, and so that was pretty cool. I think that portion of the pest control industry is certainly looking to grow by leaps and bounds in the coming years. But anyways, enough about that. Also had some good news. I may talk about that in the future, but nevertheless, we do hope you take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so that you can be sure to be notified of future updates. I tend to produce about once a week. If you're looking for the information sooner, it always comes out in my Rumble page at Wildlife Control Consultant over at Rumble. And then sometimes at a future date it comes out on YouTube. Love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I love to hear your comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows. Perhaps you'd like to be on the show. So we'd love to have you. I think it's kind of a passion of mine to be sure that we're getting new equipment and information out to those of you in the wildlife control field. And to be mindful, I'm sure there are people that aren't in the wildlife control field who also are listening. We're happy to have you along as well. So some of this may be a little technical at times, but that's okay. You can learn what the professionals are certainly learning, because we do, as part of the Pest Geek podcast family, I do go geeky at times down into some things that normally wouldn't be found in normal training types of events. So there's a lot of people out there that can sort of teach you how to catch X, Y, and Z or manage it. I tend to go a little bit geekier because I have access to literature and resources that the average speaker doesn't have access to. So we all have our niches, and that's where I can do mine. I will talk about how to catch things and control them directly, but we tend to go beyond just the surface bullet points to get down into some further details. But nevertheless, we'd love to hear from you. Even criticisms, comments, would enjoy that to the extent that I can, I guess. Wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. All right, well, let me pull up my PowerPoint here to help me keep me guided along. This week, I thought I would talk a little bit about an active ingredient. You'll notice that some of my previous podcasts delved into some of the active ingredients used for the control of rodents, and of course, we're all still waiting for the EPA to come out with its ruling. It gave us a preliminary interim decision on rodenticides, and so there was a huge amount of outcry, both positive and negative, about the EPA's proposal for rodenticides. We're all waiting to find out what that ultimate decision is going to be. I suspect it's going to be industry changing, and so things are going to be changing. So it doesn't change the data about the active ingredients. You'll notice that I've done some podcasts in the past about active ingredients, and I haven't covered all of them yet, but I will work my way slowly through them. I think I've covered something on brodifacoum. I think I did some work on zinc phosphide and probably strychnine as well. And now this week I'm doing something on Alpha Chloralose, probably one that you haven't heard of ordinarily because it's relatively new in terms of a rodenticide here in the United States, although it's been used in Europe and in England for some time. But nevertheless, why don't we get started? So It is a non-anticoagulant, and it has a new product that's been registered in 2019 here in the United States. So just to kind of give you, set the table, so to speak, in terms of what we have, what products or rodenticides do we have for the control of rodents. These are registered by the EPA in the United States. So we have two broad categories: anticoagulants and non-anticoagulants. So just a reminder, or perhaps if you're new to this type of field, anticoagulants are those products that kill the rodent by causing it to bleed internally. Non-anticoagulants kill by other means. So anticoagulants are also divided into two major categories. First generation anticoagulant rodenticides, you might see it as phrased as SGAR, that's Sam, Golf, Alpha, Raven, SGAR, second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or first, FGAR. So we have first generation anticoagulant rodenticides and then second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Those are the most common rodenticides used in structural work, although with regulations coming from states like California, non-anticoagulant rodenticides are being used more frequently. Now, strychnine is not available for structural use. It's only allowed for pocket gophers in the United States. So pocket gophers, of course, they don't occur nationwide, so it's only for those states where pocket gophers would even occur. And in some cases right now, it is considered a restricted use in some of those states. Other states, it's a general use, which is a little surprising. Though with the new proposed changes from the PID, I think I misspoke that. It's not preliminary, it's proposed interim decision, PID, proposed interim decision. They are looking to make strychnine as a restricted use product nationwide, but we'll see if they follow through with that suggestion. I kind of hope that they do. Zinc phosphide is available. It's typically not used in structural areas except for as a tracking powder, although it is used in many agricultural situations. So you can see alpha chloralose falls underneath the non-anticoagulant. And so non-anticoagulants can be single dose. In other words, does the rodent need to feed on it multiple times to get a toxic dose, or can it feed on it just once to get a toxic dose? And you see my designations there. They're not mine. I'm copying them from researchers, of course. There is some debate at times on some of these. I believe cocalciferol is sometimes considered to be a single or a multiple. So I went on the more conservative side, if memory serves, and went on the multiple side. Of course, it all, these things depend on how much a rodent eats. But when it comes to the second gen, typically a single dose, a single feeding is enough to kill a rodent. But that's not always the case for some of our non-anticoagulant rodenticides. First gens, typically they got to eat more than once in order to get a toxic dose. So those are multiple feed. Second gens are single feed. But anyways, I digress. Let's get on with our talk here about alpha chloralose. So I have this slide titled as "What is a Name?" for those of you that are driving and aren't able to watch. And what I have here is a list of somewhere around 7 or 8 different names that spellings, perhaps I should say, for alpha chloralose. So this can be quite confusing. And so it can be called alpha chloralose, A-chloralose, alpha-chloralose, chloralose, chloralosane, glucocoralose, chloralose-alpha, alpha-D, glucocoralose, or chloralose, comma, alpha dash. Wow. So it has a lot of different names. It can be confusing. I'm simply going to call it alpha chloralose, and I'm going to break that up typically, but there's a variety of spellings. So if you're wondering why is this being spelled in different ways, it depends who's doing the spelling, it seems. So I don't have an explanation as to why it's so different with different places, but I'm just giving you in sort of a sketch here of what it's called. So we're just going to call it alpha chloralose. You can have it as one word or two words. alpha or chloralose. It's the same thing that we're talking about here. So what is alpha chloralose? Well, for those of you that have a little bit of a chemistry background, I'm not one of those, but I try to give a little bit of this. It shows you the structure of the molecule here. It's a chlorinated acetal derivative of glucose. Now, glucose, you may know, is a sugar. So in the CAS number, that's the chemical identification number that's used for it. It's an international sort of code, is 15879-93-3. Let me read that again for you. 15879-93-3. So what are some of the properties of this particular product? Well, it's a white powder in its sort of pure form, what we call the technical form. And it also can irritate the skin. I guess it has some acidic properties. And then it's also very toxic to fish, and so it can be very long-lasting. So whenever you read a label, and this is the case for most pesticides, it'll say don't contaminate water. But in this case, there is some evidence that can be really toxic to fish. And interestingly enough, one document I looked at said that the product has a 3-year shelf life. Now, so that means if you purchase it, I would assume that that's, and sometimes you buy some rodenticides and it's on the shelf and you use it a while. That could be a problem. So make sure, I would guess, in light of that, make sure that you kind of use it within 3 years if you have a shelf life. They generally tell you to keep it out of sunlight as well. So now, alpha chloralose, the active ingredient here, was registered in the United States for use in a product called Black Pearl, and it was registered in 2019 here in the United States by the Environmental Protection Agency. And the EPA registration number is 89670-1. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with how to read an EPA registration number, the first group of numbers is the manufacturer's code. So the company that produces it has the numerical designation of 89670. If you buy things from Bell Labs, for example, that's 12455, as memory serves. The second number that's after the dash is the number of the pesticide. So, for example, this company, this is the first product that they have registered within the United States. So that number is the first part of that number for the company. That is their number forever. So that number never goes away. The second number is like which version of the product, what pesticide did they register first? And this would be the alpha chloralose product that called Black Pearl. And so it was used in Europe and I believe it still is used in Europe. Now, some of you who've been involved in various aspects of wildlife control may recognize alpha chloralose as a stupefying agent used to capture Canada geese. And so they would take the product, they would dip it into bread, chum the geese would eat it, and then they kind of pass out, and then you go over and collect them. That's only registered for wildlife services. But here, the product is being used as a killing agent rather than simply a stupefying agent, something that makes an animal go unconscious. In Europe, my understanding is that they have used the product also as a pesticide for birds as well. I don't know if that's still the case. My hunch is probably not, but I'm not a specialist in European pesticide codes, so you'd have to look that up on your own. Now, the product was registered here in the United States, and it comes in paste bait. It's a paste bait. You'll see the image talks about paste or grain. My understanding is that's the only portion that's been registered, at least at this time, at least the one that I was looking up, is a paste bait in satchets, these little packets that you'd have. And it comes in 5-gram satchets, and each one would contain 200 milligrams of active ingredient, and so at a 4% level. So it's a 4%. Now that's a lot when you think about it, because if you look at some of the other anticoagulant products, you'll find that the anticoagulants often are at 0.0 0.05. Like with zinc phosphide, it'll be 2%, 0.02. So this is 0.04. So that's a lot when you think about how much alpha chloralose is put inside of each of these particular products on as a percentage base. But nevertheless, that's what is required to get these mice killed. And so it's only labeled in the United States for the control of mice. So they must be held in bait stations, tamper-resistant bait stations, of course, and interestingly enough, indoor use only. So that's a little surprising. So you can't put it on the exterior of a building like we can with other products. So this one has a very limited use. Now, I suspect, perhaps, especially with some of the new regulations coming down the pike, maybe that'll get loosened up over time. I certainly hope so, but nevertheless, at this particular time when I'm speaking, and I'm speaking in 2023, it's only allowed inside of the building. Now, it's registered in the state that I live in, but I haven't really seen it available. Not that I've looked that hard, but I haven't really seen it marketed that hard here in the United States. So I'd be interested in any of you out there who have actually used the product. I would love to hear from you and get your sense of whether, you tried it, did you like it, did you not like it, did you find that it worked? That would be interesting. And whether it's actually available. Sometimes companies, will register a product and then it's just not available, which is, unfortunate to be sure. Now, how does the product work? How does alpha chloralose work? And that's called the mode of action. What is its effect on the biochemistry of the animals that eat it? And it's effectively a central nervous system toxic agent. So it basically causes depression in the animal. Now, depression doesn't mean they're emotionally depressed, although that could be the case, but how would we necessarily know? What it's referring to is that, biologically speaking, they become lethargic. That means they look like they're tired and slow. Mice move along because being slow with a mouse means you're more likely to be killed by a predator, of course. They also lose motor control in the sense that they're no longer coordinated, so they're going to stagger around. Like, think of someone who's maybe drunk or really drunk, and they're staggering around. They've lost that motor control of their body, and it also affects the rodent's breathing as well. And then, interestingly enough, it causes hypothermia. Now, you may recognize hypothermia as that when someone gets really, really cold, you can die from that. And that's essentially how these mice die, is they lose too much heat, and they essentially go to sleep and freeze. Now, if you know anything about mice have a very small mass. In other words, they don't have a lot of weight to them, but they have a lot of surface area. So the relationship of the surface area to their weight is actually quite high, because there's a lot of surface with little mass, and so they're losing a lot of heat ordinarily. Where those of us who are larger, I'm over 6 feet, and over 200 pounds, I don't lose heat as quickly as a mouse would, because I have greater mass compared to the surface area of my skin, where that's not the case for a mouse. And so this product helps enhance that mouse's ability to lose heat, probably by not creating it as much, because of that depression that's caused in their system. So if their central nervous system is depressed, they're not replacing the heat that they're ordinarily losing to the environment. So it shouldn't come as any surprise. This product works better when it's cold. And we'll talk about that more shortly. So how much does a mouse need to eat in order to die? Well, a 25-gram mouse would need to eat 0.3 to 0.5 grams of bait. So those little satchets I was talking about, they would need to eat basically about half a gram in order to get a toxic dose. In their drowsiness, interesting how fast this occurs. They become drowsy within 15 minutes, and then they follow by that death typically within the day. In fact, it's so fast that they can actually go to sleep and then die inside the bait station, according to one publication that I looked at, which is rather interesting. Now, how toxic is the product? Well, it's a category 2, so it's moderately toxic through oral ingestion, and it also has inhalation toxicity, and that's a category 3. But both of those are considered moderate. So not really a big issue for us, but we certainly don't want to be eating. People have died from consuming this particular product, or this active ingredient, I should say. So we always want to make sure that children certainly can't get a hold of it. And that's why you want to use proper bait stations so that children and dogs and cats, of course, can't get into it. The emphasis is on dogs because dogs are more likely to eat something. One study that I read talked about how cats would not consume the product directly. So if a cat is going to be exposed, someone would have had to either force-fed the cat, or the cat would have had to have been exposed through secondary poisoning. And that, interestingly enough, is quite rare because it seems to be shed through the urine and the feces relatively quickly in the animal. But if it's going to sleep in 15 minutes, then that could occur relatively quickly. So best uses of this particular active ingredient, obviously colder temperatures would be enhanced by its ability to suppress the rodent's ability to replace heat. Colder temperatures would actually accelerate that. So the research says that rodents, like mice here, we're talking about mice, 50 to 61 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can get a 95% control using this particular active ingredient. It can kill mice at higher temperatures, but we're talking here about best uses. So my suspicion is that I'd be interested in those of you that have used it in certainly higher temperatures and maybe a warm house, whether you had good success with this particular product. So I'd love to hear from you. Again, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Are there secondary hazards? Well, as I mentioned before, the secondary hazards appear to be quite low. Now, the research that I saw, there could be others that I missed, but the research I saw was focused on rats rather than mice. So I'd be interested in finding out what the secondary hazards might be with mice, because different biologies may excrete the product faster than others. But what they found with rats is that rats eliminated the alpha chloralose really quickly. And in fact, 60 to 7% was excreted through the urine within 24 hours, and then 20 to 30% was eliminated through the feces within 24 hours. And interestingly enough, the research said it didn't really matter, it wasn't dose dependent. In other words, even if you used more of the product on the rat, in other words, they're often force feeding these rats when they're doing these types of tests, it didn't really change the excretion rates, so it left their bodies at basically the same time, which is rather interesting. Typically, you'd think the more you consume, the longer it would take for you to get rid of it, but in this particular product, that didn't appear to be the case, according to the article that I looked at. So what are the risks to dogs? We talked about how dogs will consume this particular product, and it is at a risk to dogs. And the LD50, notice the range here, is anywhere from 100 to 600 milligrams per kilogram. So always remember when we're dealing with LD50 only means that half the population, given this amount, half the population dies, but also half the population lives. And so it can be quite a range here. The research talked about how their dogs have survived doses reaching 610 milligrams per kilogram, but that death may occur if it reaches 660 milligrams per kilogram. Now remember, there's 200 milligrams of alpha chloralose in each one of those satchets. So that in this particular Black Pearl product, so that means the dog would only need to eat about 4, and they're well over, per kilogram. So a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So it could have for small dogs. Obviously, the risk would be significantly higher. The effect on the dog typically occur within 1 to 2 hours, but can last anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Bottom line here, folks, make sure you have bait stations and you locate those products in areas where dogs can't get at it. So people love their dogs. We don't want their dogs getting killed or harmed. It's just not worth it. So be sure to follow that label and to use quality bait stations when you're using the product. So again, I would love to hear from you. So that's kind of a brief introduction of Alpha Chloralose. I hope that you found that useful. I'm looking forward perhaps someday to be trying it out. I struggle with mice where I live, and so it'd be kind of neat to maybe try Alpha Chloralose to see if I'm getting see if I could get some efficacy from it and just kind of get a sense for what it's like. But if you've had some experience, I would think this product would be quite useful in structures like sheds and garages. I would hope the label would allow that, but again, always check your label, of course. Follow label. Label is the law, as you probably know, but make sure you follow that label. But I would think that would be a really great location because it's not heated. And so especially during that winter time. And of course, winter mice often want to get into structures during those colder temperatures, to be sure, to get shelter from that. So you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Again, do take a few moments, if you would, to drop me a line. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Also visit my website at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. I have publications there, and you may want to use that as part of your continuing education. I'm also available for speaking engagements. And just a reminder to those of you, I'm always looking for photos of damage that you may have. I'm looking to buy use rights. I'm not looking to have to own the photo. I'm just looking for permission to use it. I'm also gotten closer to finishing my book here, the Vertebrate Pest Handbook, 3rd edition. So I've made some more edits on that. I've had a reviewer go through some of that and make some comments. Of course, there's always one more thing to do when you're writing a book, but I'm hoping to have that out by the new year or shortly thereafter. Part of that's going to depend on when the proposed interim decision from the EPA becomes finalized. So I'm questioning whether I should wait till that becomes available. So stay tuned. I'm also looking to be speaking at the Vertebrate Pest Conference. So those of you that may be attending the Vertebrate Pest Conference, California, definitely reach out. Perhaps we can have dinner one of those nights, and love to meet you there. And I will also be at the West Coast Rodent Academy. So getting out there doing some California work this year. So if you're going to be there, I'd love to talk to you as well, because there's so much to learn and engage about the control of rodents, because you do important work, those of you out in the field. And if you're not a professional and you just want to learn about rodent control, well, yes, controlling rodents is very important, because we don't want them in your house. So we want to be sure you're handling that, but also doing it in an environmentally responsible way, as well as safe for your loved ones and pets, of course. So also, we have a Facebook page with the Pest Geek Podcast. Join us there. We'd love to have you comment. I do post there from time to time. But again, hope you're having a good week. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife. And why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.